Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi, and welcome to the ISO Show. Thank you very much for joining me today. Today's interviews are actually with two people from Haymarket Media Group, which is Natalie Harris, who's the procurement executive at Haymarket, and Gary Charlton, who's the head of procurement. They're going to be sharing with me their insights into their experience of implementing and achieving ISO 201, the Sustainable Event Management Standard. Great. So, hi, Natalie and Gary. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello.
Great. Well, obviously, I've only provided a really brief introduction. It would be fantastic if you could provide some insight into Haymarket Media Group and just share with us a little bit about what the organisation does.
So Haymarket Media Group is a global media data and information company, and we have offices in the UK, US, Germany, India and Asia, and we produce live events, digital, print, education, data and tech services, and we empower our clients and communities around the world.
Great. What type of events do you run and digital media do you publish?
So we produce in the UK awards, events, conferences and exhibitions. We also produce live events around the world with our global subsidiaries. We produce events for ourselves and also produce events on behalf of other people, other companies and professional bodies. In terms of our digital business, that's in the UK primarily around marcoms, automotive and built environment markets, and around the globe they have all sorts of different markets, including medical education in the US, which is a very large part of their business, and also finance in Asia.
Okay, great. And Gary, do you mind just sharing with me a bit about your role, please?
Yes, so I'm the head of procurement for the UK, and part of my role encompasses supporting the Haymarket's approach towards sustainability. So sustainability is a key part of how Haymarket engages with our supply chain, and we want to make sure that our products and our services are the most environmentally sustainable and socially sustainable as they can be.
Great, thanks, Gary. And Natalie, I know that you've been instrumental in driving this ISO 201 project forward. Could you also provide a bit of insight into your role at Haymarket?
Yes, so I'm the procurement executive here at Haymarket Media Group, and I work directly with Gary Charlton, head of procurement. So we are a team of two. A lot of what I do is a primary focus with live events, purchasing products and services. I support the teams on buying legally, sustainably and ethically, and making sure that, competition is encouraged and we aggregate spend. But a lot of what I've been doing as part of this project, obviously, is around helping them build and move towards ISO 201 and the creation of a sustainable event management system.
Perfect, thank you. So before we start diving into your experience with implementing the standard, it's been a little while since we actually covered ISO 201. If our ISO show listeners are wondering what the heck ISO 201 actually is, I'd recommend that you go back to episode 38, which is where we explained all about ISO 201. But ultimately, this standard is for the management of events, but done to ensure that all events are run in a sustainable manner. And we know that there's a lot of waste in the events industry, which was why back in 2012, which is actually where the standard gets the number from, 2012-1, it was actually launched at the 2012 Olympics. So that was the first sustainable Olympics that we've ever seen in the history of the Olympics, which was awesome that we did that for London 2012 Olympics. And since then, a number of organisations have started to adopt this particular standard, but it's been mostly venues. So it's amazing that a media group such as Haymarket has actually embraced this standard to implement it for their events globally. Okay, so in terms of what ISO 20121 is, so it provides a framework for managing events sustainably. So part of that would include having the policies, procedures, registers and records to demonstrate that the events are being run in a sustainable manner. So it's not just a case of paying lip service to sustainability, it's actually practicing what you preach and making sure that all events are run in a sustainable manner. And as with any other ISO standard, it's based on the plan, do, check, act cycle. But as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to find out a little bit more about the standard, go back to episode 38. So if I may start with you then, Gary, why did you consider ISO 20121? I know that this was actually initiated just before the pandemic, wasn't it, if I remember rightly? But what was the key driver behind it?
It was, yes. I think our first meeting with you, Mel, was probably about towards the end of 2019, and little did we know that within a few months everything would have changed. So the driver for us was when we first looked at 2012-1. So Haymarket in the UK is accredited with 14,001 and 50,001, and subsequent to that, actually, two of our global businesses in US and Asia have also got 14,001. So we understood the benefits of having the ISO standard, that you get the framework to start making better decisions, measuring what you're doing, setting KPIs, making that incremental improvement, and also communicating the benefits and the reason why, the rationale why you're doing this. So at the time, our head of facilities, who was managing the ISO standards, was looking at other areas that we could perhaps introduce further ISO standards, particularly around sustainability, and wanted to look at live events, because we're obviously very mindful that live events was a large part of our product offering, that actually does have a sustainable footprint, an impact to do better to make the shows more sustainable. So that was the first step of our driver, and then we measured the benefits that we thought of once we were able to implement it, what we thought that the benefits were to our live events. And unfortunately, when we gathered all that information, obviously we spoke with yourselves and kind of ascertained how difficult and it would be and what would be required, that when we presented that to the people who run our live events business, that they were very positive about it. The people who run our business, in fact, they're very positive about the benefits, and we got the go-ahead to proceed.
Great. And in terms of the process, could you share with me what was involved, from the initial kind of thought and idea about going for ISO 20121? What was the process that you went through?
Well, I think we looked at what the benefits would be and what we thought they would be, and that's, that we're, as I said, sustainability is central to how Haymarket wants to operate as a business and how it operates as a business. We knew that by implementing that, we'd implement some standardisation across processes. We've got very different types of events, and we wanted to try and get some uniformity, and that was quite important to the lady who runs the live events business, Donna Murphy, who's our deputy MD. We saw it as creating competitive advantage. So we got all of those, what we saw as the benefits and the risks and costs of implementing the standard, and who would be able to do it and what the opportunities were. And then we took that to the business, and as I say, we got sign off and a very positive backing, and we were very fortunate that at that point, Natalie was looking for a project. She had a great background in working with our live events team around procurement and introducing sustainability concepts, things like modern slavery, things like doing that due diligence around the suppliers, about what accreditations they have, how they operate. So it was a really logical next step to get Natalie involved, and she's done a fantastic job of getting ISO embedded in the business, working with the internal teams and pushing it through.
Yeah, so Natalie, how long did it take then from beginning to end?
From our first engagement with Blackmores, starting the process, was February 2022. From there, we have just been accredited, and it's now August. So we were accredited in July 2023. So we're talking about a good 18 months for the planning, preparation, the creation, the work with Blackmores to develop that, and a lot of the refinement as well for the system itself, making sure that actually what we had created works very well for our business and vice versa, because a lot of this is around change management and actually talking around the benefits of why we did it. We know that change management and change through processes is quite difficult to do. So ISO, any ISO framework actually that you use, the management systems that it gives you, enables you to make change efficiently and steadily and in a way that means it harmonizes an approach where lots of different teams might have different processes to approach certain things, certain areas, different procedures, but it brings it all together and it brings people together to understand and sing from the same hymn book. So in terms of timeline, yes, 18 months, and we have just been accredited in July 2023.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations for achieving certification. And I think just picking up on a couple of points there, Natalie, I think you mentioned a few key words there that I think were instrumental in having such a successful stage 1 and stage 2. I recall seeing an email about some really complimentary comments from the assessor. And I think it does come down to the fact that you were so thorough as an organisation. And you mentioned about change management there and getting people involved. I think it's so important, isn't it? I think especially in the events industry, where I know you have like 4 different types of events and organised in different ways. So, a conference is organised, very differently to another type of event that you run, for example, a forum or an exhibition. And also, in terms of timings, you have to make sure that you've got an event available to be able to then evidence compliance, which is different to any other standard, isn't it?
Yes, so we had to work very carefully with our current events calendar. And obviously, as you've said, that includes multiple formats and different timings. So that is what took up a lot of the planning and understanding who is available, resource planning, and choosing our events carefully as well. The events that we wanted to base the build of a sustainable event management system on, because we needed to make sure that what we were doing was not just kind of, picking any event at random and seeing what happens, but actually we were doing something that makes sense, that we could learn from, that we could change, not necessarily easily, but we could start the change process sooner rather than later for those kind of events operationally and in terms of supplier management and all of those kind of things. So there was a lot of consideration that went into that about how we kind of matched the events calendar and our portfolio to the sustainable event management system.
I think with all standards, it is obviously all about improvement and raising standards. And the starting point to that is the gap analysis process, where you look at where you're at now and where you need to be. And those organisations that haven't got that benchmark don't know where they're at until they start on that gap analysis. Could you just share with me some insights into your experience of that process and what was involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gary would agree with me here that the gap analysis was integral to what we did.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I remember the first gap analysis. Like any business, you like to think that everything you do is absolutely brilliant, and that you're kind of performing as best you can. And I think doing the gap analysis around sustainability demonstrated how much more we could be doing, and it was a bit daunting, and everyone was a bit crestfallen when they saw the initial results. But then, very quickly we managed to increase that gap analysis by a huge amount, really, really quickly. And, again, that just brings home the point about why you're doing ISO, and implementing any standard, which is just to have to improve your processes, just to make them as tighter and as good as possible.
Yeah. And to add to that, I would say that the way that the gap analysis was performed by Blackmores enabled us to see a translation between the ISO standard itself and a breakdown of these units and subunits and areas of compliance, and then a measure against that was clear for us to see where those gaps were. Obviously, no one really knows the amount of work that it's going to take you until you finish, but we had a much better understanding. So where we ran our first gap analysis with Blackmores, we were able to see that we were at 27%, and that 27% was where we might have had certain policies and procedures already in place, perhaps based on our existing accreditations, including our environment and energy management systems. So that gave us an indication that we were in a good place, but there was a lot of work we could do. What was reassuring was seeing the leap from 27% to 59% at our checkpoint halfway through with Blackmores, and actually being reassured that to achieve that and to get to almost 60% was not as daunting as we thought. It would take work and time, but it was achievable, and that for us was pretty invaluable, because we could have turned around and said, we don't want to do this anymore, this is going to be too much. So to be able to visualize that was great.
And I think actually, one of the benefits as well about using the resource like Blackmores, working with Blackmores, is that actually when we first got that first result, and everyone was, as I say, a bit crestfallen, to have Andrew there, kind of saying, don't worry, this is absolutely normal, you'll be fine, it will only take a bit of work and you're going to get up there, that it does help you persevere with it and think, okay, we can do this, it's going to take a bit of work and it's going to be change, but we're reassured that it's normal where we are, and actually where we're going to get to, and everything that was said was actually achieved. So that was very reassuring, and that just helps you, with that change management piece. It just gives you that bit of confidence, like, okay, we can press on, we can persevere with this.
Yeah, and I think having a strong team of committed people, they do make a difference in having that kind of sense of, yeah, we're on this path to continual improvement. We know where we're at. We know we're in a fairly good place at the moment, but we know that we could be better. And I think it's that team effort. And I know that there were people, from different areas of the organisation that were involved, and obviously, coordinated through Natalie and yourself, Gary, that made it all happen. So if we look at the gaps, sorry.
So I was just going to say, actually having that leadership, and having the Donna Murphy, our managing director who manages the live events teams, having her commitment and absolute trust and faith that it was the right thing to do was absolutely fundamental to success. Any change management talks about having leadership, and having that person that's going to make other people look at the change and embed that change. It wouldn't. She was as integral as Natalie in making sure that the standard was put in place, but it wouldn't have happened without.
Yeah, leadership commitment is a key aspect of 2012-1, and yet without it, it's an uphill struggle. It's a huge challenge. So the fact that you've got a strong leadership team there really did help to support everybody involved with the implementation. And when we look at the gaps, then could you just kind of share with us how you've managed to bridge the gaps then that were identified?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the gaps that we had, we realised that there were a lot of documents that we needed to create. And that means formalising what might already be in place. And that might be a common theme amongst anyone developing an ISO standard or a management system, is that you might have these things in place, they're just not formalised. There were some things that we then realised we don't do, like risk registers. So as a procurement team, we do, because it's part of who we are and what we do, but perhaps It wasn't universal across the board with the events teams. They, would do their health and safety and all of the appropriate risk approaches, but it's not a formalised piece. The good thing is that we had the ISO 14000 and 15001 standards, and we have a specialist, our facilities and environmental assistant here at Haymarket, who manages those. And her input was invaluable to that, because it enabled us to see what those procedures looked like. And you'll often find that a lot of the ISOs, which we didn't know, are quite similar in their structure around having certain risk procedures, management review procedures, lots of different things there. So what we were able to do was to look at those documents and think, okay, do we need our own document here? Can we collaborate on this document, and can we create a combined document that works for the entire set of management systems that we have? So all in all, we ended up creating 31 brand new documents. So they were things from procedures, registers, logs, records, diagrams, lots of different relevant things that get used every day, every month, every quarter, year. They all get reviewed and used within the system. And then we had 13 other documents that were combined with our existing ISO standards. So in total, around 44 documents, probably around 45 now, because there's a few new ones. As you continually improve, you realise that there might be some new things that you need. So it's quite a big beast, and it's quite a lot of work, but those documents now give us really clear indications of what we're supposed to be doing, when they track, they measure, they set a parameter around all of us to say, you must continue, you must improve, you must do this. And they are not necessarily out of touch commitments or things that we can't do. Every document that we created was reviewed very thoroughly by everyone involved in the business, from, as Gary said, Donna, our deputy MD, to the event managers who work in the teams, to make sure that what we were committing to and deciding on was fully plausible for our business. And then my role was to make sure, working with Andrew at Blackmores, that it was compliant with the ISO standard as well. So it's a lot of work, 31 new documents, 13 existing documents that we updated. But we now have a visual system which is really, really fundamental to how we are going to continue to deliver sustainable events.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you highlighted, what it did actually provide in terms of the key difference. And I think you mentioned about it providing absolute clarity for the business on what it needed to do, when, where, when, how, who, etc. It removes a lot of the guesswork, doesn't it? So in theory, although it sounds as though there's a lot of work involved in it, in theory that should be to make everybody's life a bit easier in terms of the management of events. I mean, would you agree with that? Or if not, what are the differences would you say that it's made?
I would say absolutely. This is a big amount of short-term work for long-term gain. And Gary and I would both agree. I think that we would do this again in a heartbeat. And I would certainly do this project again in a heartbeat, because I know that it is not simply a creation of individual siloed processes that may or may not get adopted, or procedures or logs or registers that may or may not be used. It is a living, breathing system that kind of injects itself as to business as usual. So I think, it's definitely short term, 18 months is short term to me, but a short term, project of hard work and dedication for long term gain. And going back to some of the benefits that we spoke about, will obviously benefit anyone new who might join our team in the future, to allow them to see a really kind of structured and standardized approach of sustainable event delivery. And also it helped upskill and provide new skills to our existing events managers for their future careers, whether at Haymarket or elsewhere, to be able to say, I deliver a sustainable event now. And we know that actually legislation is continuously coming in and changing. around that anyway. So there's lots of things and lots of benefits that it's given us.
And I think, we, from having implemented 14,001 and 50,001, that we know that by implementing the standards that we have fundamentally become a more sustainable business. So that we know that by implementing 2012-1, that fundamentally our events will become more sustainable events. And, that's the key, that's why we're doing it, is to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and we're instead of just creating an event that is a standard event and a sustainable event, that all of our events will be sustainable events, and that will just become the standard.
Yeah, I think in terms of the benefits that you've both just shared there, I think it's really interesting how it's beyond just having policies and procedures, isn't it? Like you said, Natalie, it's about, anybody new that's coming into the organisation, it's really clear how you run your events. It's done in a sustainable way, and you can be proud of that fact as well, that's kind of leaving a legacy, beyond just implementing a system. But I think there is an option here whether to go for, the creation of a sustainable event management system and just leave it at that, or to choose to actually invest in certification and to get the badge, kind of the formal accreditation. I mean, what would you say was the main benefit from achieving accreditation?
I would say that the achievement of the accreditation itself is, in terms of morale and in terms of being able to show our employees the kind of business we are, is a really fundamental piece. But it also means that actually someone checked what we were doing, and we like the fact that actually, we could hold a mirror up and say, right, we've created this system, we're confident in it. We've worked with Blackmores, who have helped us, create and check and internally audit what we've done. But we would like this to be checked by a party who has had no involvement whatsoever, and can actually tell us whether we're on the right track, and whether this is actually going to be something that we can use for years to come, that we can make sure that we are checking ourselves constantly and learning, and that actually what we're doing is realistic as well for our business, that it makes sense, that we're not kind of over-egging it or underplaying it. We're kind of right on track, but also keeping ourselves, in line with some good goals. I think it was just really fundamental for us in that perspective, that actually having the certification said, yes, the work that you are doing, although it does not stop here, and a certification is for certain not the end goal, because you have surveillance audits and you have to recertify, but it enabled us to know that we are on track. And I think for those involved and for those becoming involved in the future, that's a really important factor for us as well.
So looking back then, what top tip would you give to somebody who's contemplating implementing an ISO standard? And in particular, it could be ISO 2012-1.
I think, from what we talked about before, and knowing the reasons why you're doing it, and what you're hoping to achieve, and make sure that you understand what the implications are of doing it, whether it's right for the business. Say, make sure that you get the support of someone that understands how to implement it. It looks very daunting. It is daunting, but it can look particularly daunting when you start off, and actually, having that reassurance and and having that support and buy-in internally is absolutely key.
Yeah, I would say and echo that, don't underestimate how much work it will take, and find somebody to project manage this.
Yeah.
And where you can, use external resources like consultants like Blackmores, because that is where you will have feedback and reflective moments to make sure that what you're doing is actually right, and you're not sitting in an echo chamber of your thoughts and processes and ideas that just relate to your business and not the outside world, because that defeats the point of sustainability in itself, doesn't it? So. Yeah, definitely. And it's not to put people off doing it, but it is also to say that it is a lot of work, and that's just something that you have to be prepared for when doing it.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much to both of you for sharing those hints and tips with us. Are there any other comments that you'd like to share with our iSocial listeners today?
The only thing I'd say is that it's been absolutely worthwhile going ahead with the accreditation. It's been hard work for everyone who's involved, particularly Natalie, who project managed the implementation. But at the end of this, we know that we've got a framework in place that will make our events as sustainable as we can. With that incremental improvement, for every event that we pull into the framework, and that's a great legacy to leave for all the people who join the business in the future.
Right. And finally, a question I like to ask at the end. Do you have a favourite quote that you'd like to leave our listeners with, either of you?
Yeah, this is actually one that we shared on our Live Events Academy page, which is our internal learning piece. And we developed this page as part of the ISO journey. But it's that the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And that's by an author called Robert Swan.
Perfect. Great way to end the podcast as well. We'll be including that in the show notes. Thank you very much for that, Natalie. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you both today. And well done once again for your achievements at Haymarket. If any of our ISO show listeners would like to find out more about Haymarket's media, digital publications and events, then you can go on to their website to check that out, and LinkedIn, of course, which will be including the links to those in the podcast show notes, wherever you listen to your podcasts on your media player, whether that's on iTunes or Spotify, or of course on our website and on SoundCloud. So you'll be able to find out more about the great work that Haymarket's doing in sustainable events over on their websites. Okay, so thanks very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you both. Thanks once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I look forward to catching up with our ISO Show listeners on the next episode of the ISO Show. Thanks very much for listening.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.